It is the duty of men to stand up in the defense of innocence. That is part of our primary call as the masculine mandate. This is fundamentally a man's issue. This is just not a subject that men talk about, unfortunately. I have at times shared with our congregation and with individuals that I was complicit in my girlfriend's abortion. There are men around the room that will look back at me with those eyes that say, I'm with you, bro. But this is just not a subject I think that men are comfortable talking about. How do you deal with the reality that you participated in the ending of the innocent human life? It's difficult to articulate, to put into words. It's shameful. And if my sharing my shame can help another man maybe become a bit more proactive in standing up for the unborn, then it's useful, it's for the good.
So at this point in the interview, I asked Pastor Lance to talk about his experience with abortion.
Well, in my final year of high school, I met a young woman where I was working, and we struck up a romance. This was in 1973, right after Roe v. Wade. I knew nothing about that decision at that time, but my girlfriend turned up pregnant, and there was another older woman at work that she was close friends with. She divulged that to her, and she told her that there were options for her, which meant abortion at that time. There was a clinic that had been set up in Los Angeles, and this woman made the arrangements for her and made an appointment, and I drove her there, and we went into the clinic. They took my girlfriend into another room, and she had the abortion. I was really clueless. I didn't really know what was going on. It was kind of a blur. She came back out. We drove home in silence. She and I broke up after a while, and years went by. This was at a period of time when I was not walking with the Lord. I had come to Christ when I was young, and during my later teen years, I really walked away from God. Then I had a crisis of return to Christ. And as I began to forge that new relationship with Him, began to really grow, began attending a church that taught the Bible expositionally, and that's really what I needed, really began to grow and develop my relationship with the Lord. All of that came back to me. And I realized, as I had heard, the Roe v. Wade decision was such a landmark decision in undercutting the sanctity of life in our culture. I began to rethink all of that, and I looked back on that time and realized, oh my goodness, I had participated in an abortion, and it never really occurred to me beyond that. But now it struck me, and I realized, what have I done? And it was difficult to deal with, to realize that what I had done is I had been complicit in the ending of a human life. In fact, it was too much for me to deal with when it first dawned on me of what had happened, and I really kind of pushed it out of my thinking. I took a position against abortion. I believed in the sanctity of life. And it wasn't until after I got married and my wife and I had our first child. I was there in the room for the delivery of our first child. And I saw the emergence of life, and now as a father, that I began to realize that I couldn't just hold a position on the sanctity of life, that I needed to do something about it. And so I became involved in the pro-life movement in Ventura County, where I live. I became a leader in a little organization called Crusade for Life that went around to local churches and spoke about the sanctity of human life and how we as Christians could be proactive in promoting the pro-life cause, raising awareness in the Christian community about the sanctity of life. And then the local crisis pregnancy center started up in our community, and I was asked to be on the board of that, and so I helped with that for a while. I've been very active as a pastor now in communicating the sanctity of human life to our community. Our church has occasionally gone out into the community to give evidence of our stand as Christians for the sanctity of human life, and made a very clear statement on this issue that we as Christians need to stand up for this in our culture because it's under attack today. But throughout this time, personally, there have been moments where I have flashed back and asked myself, how old would my child be? And what would his or her name be? And what would my relationship with that child be today? And the realization of that has profoundly affected the way that I view this issue. That was a person, and I was complicit in the ending of his or her life. And I will live the rest of my days trying to turn that death into the preservation of life of others.
Then I asked him how he would respond to someone saying, abortion is just a women's issue and men should stay out of it.
I know that there are many pro-choice, pro-abortion advocates that would say that this is a woman's issue, it's an issue of privacy. I find that an illogical position. At what line, at what place do we draw a right to privacy as opposed to a right to life? Which is a higher value, the right to live or the right to privacy? You must have the right to live before you could have a right to privacy. Biologically, human life begins at the moment of conception. When a sperm and ovum meet, life begins. Everything that we eventually become, it starts right at that moment.
By the way, I realized that last statement pretty much directly ended up in part of the narration for the actual film.
Gender, eye color, height, shoe size, everything that we eventually become starts at that moment.
When you have the exchange of the DNA from the mother and the father that combine to become one new individual, it's at the moment of conception that you become a person. The law says the moment of birth. And yet we have this sort of schizophrenia in our system today that a woman can go to an abortion clinic and have her child aborted up to the very moment of delivery. Even partial birth abortions are legal. But if that woman on her way to the abortion clinic to have her child aborted is hit by another driver and she and her child are killed, it's considered a double homicide. That is a legal schizophrenia that makes no sense, and yet our culture seems to be fine with it. And how should men be involved in this? It is the duty of men to stand up in the defense of innocence. That is part of our primary call as the masculine mandate. We are to defend the innocent, to defend women and children and other men who are incapacitated. That is part of what it means to be a man. So this is fundamentally a man's issue. If we do not stand up and protect the innocent human life in the womb, I think that we've abrogated our responsibility as men.